Aloha, happy Aloha Friday. I am Rachel James, standing in for Stan the Energy Man. Last time we spoke, I introduced you to my code name, R2H2, and I'm glad that Stan gave me an opportunity to come back and share that with you again. We have an opportunity today to speak with Shalanda Baker, who's an associate professor at the UH Richardson School of Law and the director of the Energy Justice Program there. Welcome to the Energy Hour.
Thanks so much, R2H2. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
It's good to be here. Good to see you outside of the law school.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So today we just kind of like to talk about energy justice.
Okay.
But before we get too deeply into that, I'd like to talk about energy broadly. And before we get there, I'd like to talk a little bit about you and how you came to work in energy.
Great. Well, so I graduated from law school back in 2005. And when I graduated from law school, it was sort of the high watermark of mergers and acquisitions, of large transactions. Lots of money was still flowing through the marketplace. And I had the opportunity to work for a big law firm. And folks who knew me and knew of my interest in development, generally construed, kind of steered me toward the project finance group. And the project finance group was a group that focused on financing large energy and infrastructure projects. Our group did projects all over the eastern seaboard. We actually were engaged in a project here in Hawaii on Maui, but that kind of fell through when I was there. We were doing projects in the development stages, such as the Cape Wind project, which has been really controversial in Massachusetts. And a couple of the people in the group also did international work. So for me, it was really a great opportunity to get real deal work, deal experience, working on energy. And the great thing about project finance is you get the opportunity to work with banks who finance the project. You work with a developer, who's usually a wily type of person. I worked with tons of developers who were just very entrepreneurial and had pie in the sky aspirations about large projects. But then we also had the opportunity to work with the regulatory group, traditionally at the federal level, and also our environmental folks. So it was really a practice that allowed me to get the broad overview of what energy development looked like. And after that, I was pretty much hooked.
Wow, that sounds like quite the journey, quite the breadth, actually,
Yeah.
of energy engagement.
Definitely.
So you mentioned a few projects, and I understand that you have a recent project that's coming to fruition down south. Is that in Mexico?
Well, actually, so I'm not sure how much to share with you, R2H2.
Oh, goodness.
No.
Only what the viewers can know.
No, of course. Well, so I practiced in Boston for a few years in project finance, and then I actually had the opportunity to lateral or transfer to our Tokyo office of my law firm. And so when I was there, it was during the height of the financial crisis. So I worked a lot on bankruptcy, which was totally outside of my realm of comfort. And as the financial crisis was happening, I saw that the world was really poised to sort of recreate the problems that led to the financial crisis. And so there in Tokyo, I decided, after my year here, I'm going to go out in pursuit of my own dream. And I left the firm in the summer of 2010, or 2009, right during the financial crisis. Everyone thought I was nuts. And I headed to Mexico. And there is where I encountered indigenous people who were fighting against big wind projects.
Okay.
And I have an affinity and love for that part of the world. I'm from Texas. I have no idea why there's such a strong connection and draw to Mexico. But I started a research project that has continued today. And I definitely hope to be able to go back and work with communities there to understand the current landscape, which has changed a lot since 2009. I'm not sure how much you know about this, but right now the Mexican energy system is undergoing a transformation, one that is opening the energy market to development by private entities in a way that wasn't allowed before. And so I'm curious about this transition because I think this opening with respect to the markets could also allow for greater engagement by communities in energy development, and that has been the focus of my work here in Hawaii over the last year and a half as well.
I see. And so with your mention of communities and indigenous people, I just hear those two words and immediately think, what a perfect place to be here in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And I understand that some of your work, especially in the recent past, has happened on the North Shore, where there are a number of wind projects, and then with the proposed merger afoot, that you've delved a little bit into that as well. But I know that I mentioned we'll get into that a bit later. If we could talk, I know, just baiting you all to make sure you stay tuned. But if we could talk about energy kind of in a broad and why it's important to individuals in the community type of a way.
Okay, so it's interesting that you mentioned that. I am currently developing and preparing to teach a class in about a week on energy justice.
Okay.
And energy justice is a term that is slowly beginning to seep into the consciousness of the state, but also nationally and globally. And energy justice is essentially access to energy. It's access, in my mind, to clean, renewable, and affordable energy. I also like to incorporate the aspect of energy democracy into any conversation about energy justice. And energy democracy simply means that communities should have the power to decide how their energy is delivered to them and be able to participate in energy decision-making with respect to their communities. And energy, broadly construed, is important because simply without it, we couldn't do anything that we're doing today. And when the cost of energy is prohibitive, we enter into something that's called energy poverty. And those who are affected by energy poverty simply don't have the means to afford energy, or they don't have access to energy. We see that a lot in the developing world. And what is interesting today, on the heels of Paris, where we reached a global agreement regarding climate, there is a big push toward a zero carbon future. And what that means is all of the communities around the world that are experiencing energy poverty will be brought out of that poverty, that energy poverty, through development. But there's a big question as to how that development will take place, who will participate in that development, how that zero carbon energy or zero carbon renewable energy development will take place, and at what costs. So again, Hawaii certainly is ground zero for all of those discussions regarding energy justice.
I agree wholeheartedly. I feel really fortunate to be in Hawaii, and it's a unique space just because it is Hawaii. And so some of the things that are here that are innate, our island state, the bounty of resources that we have readily available to us, and the wealth of technology and intellect that can really harness those resources. It's interesting, though, in the conversations about energy that I have, which have gained momentum in the past few weeks, it seems. With this new year, it's been a big bang. But it's a rarity that I hear people talk about energy justice, not even just the term, but as a concept, in realizing that there are people even here in the US who have challenges accessing the energy that they need or accessing it affordably. And so I used to work a bit in homeless resources and did some homeless service programs. And one of the challenges we had was making sure that people were able to pay their utilities. And the utility bill, I don't know if you're the LIHEAP program, which is a low income housing energy assistance program. Ooh, that was a few years ago. But we had to use that program quite a bit. And it's unfortunate because it was a limited program. And so we'd reach kind of maximum capacity at some point, but we had a wealth of people who still needed access to that, well, to that subsidy, essentially. So when I hear you speak of energy justice, it's a very real piece. It's something that I've not experienced myself, but I've seen directly for the people here across the islands. Well,
it's fascinating because there are two instances that happened in recent memory that sort of bring us to this question of energy justice. The most recent one, of course, is Hurricane Sandy, which occurred in 2012 in New York, and then before that, Hurricane Katrina, which essentially, obviously, did a lot of damage to the Louisiana and Gulf Coast region. Hurricane Sandy was really a wake-up call for the state of New York with respect to its own vulnerability around climate change. And so climate change really intersects with this idea of energy justice because we see on the horizon bigger storms, more powerful storms, more unpredictable weather that will leave communities that are already vulnerable for a number of reasons, whether that is through economic issues and lack of access to resources, housing that is already in diminished areas due to environmental harm, et cetera, et cetera. So these are already vulnerable communities that will be rendered even more vulnerable in the climate change era. And so energy justice really can help to remediate some of that vulnerability by allowing communities to say, okay, how can we participate in a small-scale energy project, maybe that is co-located or located closer to our home, so that when a big storm strikes, we might be more resilient rather than relying on a power generation system that is further away from us, or a centralized system that once it goes down can impact a broader swath of a region. So New York is undergoing quite a transition on its own to figure out how those changes can take place and what the regulatory model needs to be to incentivize the many utilities that participate in the New York marketplace to make those changes, and also incentivize community participation in some of these types of innovations.
I see.
So New York is a good model, but that's happening now in sort of pockets around the country, and of course Hawaii is ripe for that kind of discussion, and has been since I got here about 1.5 years ago.
Okay. You mentioned mini utilities, and truthfully, perhaps I should be ashamed, but I've not heard that term. I feel that I know what you mean by that, but I'm curious what the interface is between mini utilities and the community. So if we're wanting to do those small scale projects, does that look like cooperatives, or what, I guess, when you're saying that model, what are you?
So that's really interesting. I think it's still not certain how all of the development on the energy front, on the community scale energy development front, will take place. Early models, so just to back up a little bit, New York has a marketplace that allows for participation by multiple utilities. And so customers have choice in deciding who provides their electricity. Con Ed is the big one. Consolidated Edison is a big utility there in New York, but there are others. And so the Public Services Commission of, or the Public Service Commission of New York, back in 2015, early on, and then going into the end of the year, really set forward a platform. It's Renewing the Energy Vision platform for this type of development. And their staff attorneys there at the PSC put together several straw proposals that indicate how this type of renewing the energy vision will take place. One aspect of these proposals was community energy development. And so one of the drafts that I read indicated that there would be an opportunity for participation by communities, but it was left quite open as to how that energy development would actually take place. The PSC recognized that there was a need for broader participation, and certain people need access to initiatives such as solar, renewable energy development, particularly solar. And so they created this platform to allow for that participation. But given the expertise that is required for energy development, the type of entity that would be able to sponsor that development would be a very sophisticated player, most likely a utility. So there is movement in New York, but as I see it and as I understand what I've read so far, and there may have been developments since late last year, it seems like the experts are the ones that will be participating.
I see.
Yeah.
So if the experts aren't in the community, and a brief answer, just we'll do a cliffhanger here, but if the experts aren't in the community, I guess I'm curious, how do communities engage?
Is this a cliffhanger?
It is a cliffhanger.
Do you want me to try to answer it now? Or?
You can answer it briefly.
Okay.
And then we'll leave everyone on the edge of their seats, and we'll come back and give a complete answer in a moment.
2 words: capacity building.
Capacity building. Yeah. Very nice. And with that, we'll go to a break, and we'll be back in just a bit.
Okay, this is Think Tech Hawaii, and it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
Come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here, and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us, hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
as important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts, and Jay Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy, 4 to 5
Aloha.
p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
And we're back. I know that you're gripping the table, wondering what the rest of the answer to the question is. So thank you for waiting on the cliff, and I'll bring you back from the edge. So before we went to the break, we asked Professor Baker, what does the engagement between the experts and the community look like? And she gave us the cliffhanger, capacity building.
So one of the things that I have really been interested in here in Hawaii is building capacity of our local communities to engage in the more sophisticated conversation around energy development. Unlike other places in the country, energy is really a kitchen table issue here. I heard a friend of mine who works at the PUC describe it as such. And it is a kitchen table issue because we pay the highest energy costs in the country.
Yes.
And so there's a gap, though, between paying that bill and understanding what's going on. And again, the work that I've been trying to do is go into communities to talk to them a little bit about what's happening in the current discourse around energy and allow them to, or give them the information so that they can more fully participate in the conversation that's happening. I think the Public Utilities Commission has also made it its business more recently to open up some of the major dockets to broader participation. Now, unfortunately, the same people, the same entities, the same players continue to participate. So you have a little bit of an echo chamber going on, and maybe old battles being replayed in a new battlefield. But I think there is a sort of movement happening within the state to broaden participation, given the merger that's on the table, given the community solar bill that passed last year, given 100% renewable energy development, that is now an imperative of the state. There really is more of an urgency and more of an interest in engaging that. And so I don't know exactly how to bridge that, but I'm very interested and serious about trying to make the bridge between the policy discourse and debate and the very lived experience of communities that are vulnerable and communities that are impacted by development.
So when I hear you mention wanting to bridge a gap, I think of transition. And I think what we've been talking about a bit is essentially transition, moving from a very, well, a bad model, for lack of a better word. But I mean, it's a model that worked for us for a time, but we're realizing there's a way to do things better. And so we're transitioning into that space where we're kind of doing better because we know how to do better. But still, there are those existing infrastructures that really kind of make it difficult, both literally in the utility, but then those infrastructures that people have built just because of their norms and what they're used to knowing about their utility or not knowing, or the comfort that they have and how they've accessed their energy. So I think as the conversation becomes more of a kitchen table conversation, people realize how much they don't actually know about their energy, myself included. So I had mentioned to you that I planned to bring my electricity bill in. I didn't bring it in. It's probably on the counter still. Nonetheless, I did take a look at it. And there's a number of charges there that I generally don't pay attention to. You know, I know that we pay high cost and I just pay my bill and turn the lights off when I'm not home and try to unplug things. But really, I haven't taken a deep dive and looked at it until recently. And in doing so, I realized there are a number of things there that I really don't know a great deal about. And so I think transitioning to a space of not even just information being there, but really being interested in how you can interact with that information and what that means to you and how you can impact what happens on your bill and not just turning the lights on and off. So if you could talk a little bit about kind of that transition, both, like I said, in the kind of literal utility energy transition, but thought transition too.
Yeah, you know, I'll start from where you ended and then kind of work up in terms of the scale of the transition. So at the individual level, I know that Hawaii Energy has made some strides
Yes.
to try to get more information out into the public's hands regarding electricity, regarding efficiency, and I applaud them for that. I've worked with folks there trying to bring forth some of the ideas that I have regarding community engagement in energy, and they've been quite helpful and responsive to thinking about ways to get information into the hands of individuals. And so for those individuals who are watching, who are also kind of flummoxed by their bill, I encourage them to say, hey, call Hawaii Energy and say, can I get some help understanding my charges, understanding how I can become more efficient in my home? Are there programs that you can assist me with? So that's at the very basic level. And a lot of people are never going to do that. I mean, you work in the energy field and only recently looked at your bill. So a lot of folks are not going to do that.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you in terms of the community transition happening. With the net energy metering order that came down late last year, I think folks are looking around saying, is there an avenue for us, common people, regular citizens, to participate in renewable energy development, or does it make more sense for us to defect from this current system, get a battery, and go off the grid? I know that's not as easy as it sounds, but certainly some of the incentives, just in terms of the way the market is functioning, lend themselves toward that direction or lead to that conclusion in a way that isn't true in other states, because their energy costs are just not high enough to incentivize defection in that way.
Right.
So for those who don't have the means, though, to defect, I think there's another conversation happening, which is how can we participate in this renewable energy transition? As a scholar and as someone who has worked in renewable energy development and in project finance, I'm really interested in the structural aspects of that. So by participation, is there a way to participate financially in the benefits of renewable energy generation if it happens to be in our backyard? Is there a way to participate on an ownership level in the energy generation that is happening, which could lead to a broader understanding of the development and mitigate some of the environmental issues perhaps that happen with energy development? Because if I'm participating, I want to make sure that the energy development that's happening in my community happens in a way that I agree with.
Right.
And so the transition that's happening mentally and sort of emotionally within our communities is, how do we participate? How do we avoid being left behind in this renewable energy transition? And I think the regulators are really working hard in the state to ensure that they create avenues and opportunities for participation. And that brings me to the outer ring of the transition, which is the utility transition. A lot of people talk about the utility death spiral, which is essentially when there's greater participation in things like rooftop solar that cut into the profits and the return on investment that the utility has. And so I'm grateful for utilities, because for many years they were the entities that built all of the infrastructure that we rely on, right? They kept the lights on. And we are in a moment of tremendous transition nationally. I think we're in a global transition where the old models, the centralized power generation models, simply don't work as well given climate change, and they are outdated financially because we don't need the type of large-scale infrastructure investments that we needed in order to get our utilities, our electric utilities up and running. And the investments that were made afforded themselves a certain recovery by the utility, and that's the economic model that they relied on. So I don't want to suggest that we don't need some investment. And so I think this is where the tension is. We do need investment in technologies that will bring our state to the 21st century in energy development, but also in electricity and electricity delivery. We need smarter systems. Someone will have to pay for that.
Yes.
And if the utility pays for it, they will then, of course, get a return on that, and rightly so for that investment. And so I think we're just at a really interesting time where the question is whether we will rely on the same type of utility to do the work that needs to be done in order to get us into a renewable energy future, or if we'll rely on communities or individuals to make those investments or to participate in the market in order to allow for that transition. And at the end of the day, no one really knows what the best model is. There are a lot of conversations happening around the state around the structure of our utility and whether the investor-owned utility is the best way to shepherd a transition, or if it's more a municipal power provider or a cooperative model.
Right.
I don't think anyone knows what the best answer is, but no matter what, money will have to be invested in order to bring us into the 21st century. It just has to happen. And whether that happens on the backs of taxpayers or on the backs of ratepayers is the question.
I see. In speaking of transition, something that I've heard tossed around a bit is decoupling the transmission from the generation. And I wondered, well, truthfully, I wonder what you think about that. But in Hawaii in particular, that seems with islands that are so disparate, it seems that if we decouple transmission, especially so much tension about undersea cables, but even on island, just if we have a utility of sorts who does the transmission and individuals generate, or however that looks, in your work, do you encounter those conversations as well?
So peripherally, people have been talking about, what assets a traditional utility is better at managing than others. And so I think the essence of what's happening now, there's a question about the marketplace and opening the market of energy generation to more players. And so if the marketplace of energy generation is opened in our state, in our island state, would that change any of the dynamics? I'm not an economist, so I don't know. I haven't run the numbers on whether that would be true. But certainly from a sort of energy democracy, energy justice standpoint, allowing broader participation by individuals and communities within the generation game could be more equitable, but it's unclear what impact that would have on those who simply would never be able to participate, no matter what.
That's a powerful piece to mention, and to say that there will be some people who will not be able to participate, no matter what. And when I hear you speak of energy justice, as I mentioned, having worked in homeless services, those are the people that I think of most immediately. The people who will never be able to participate, but who will be gravely impacted by whatever the participation group has decided. And so we'll segue into this a bit more because I think that leads into the work that you're doing with their energy justice program. But I'm curious, in kind of the scheme that you worked previously in law, where you were working with those transactional pieces and working with developers and just like those different players in this energy scheme, did you find that was a conversation that people were interested in having, but perhaps not really knowing how to engage there, and so just working kind of with the status quo, or was that not really a piece of the puzzle at all?
So any developer that engages in a large project development has to engage in a number of steps to get that project off the ground. So they definitely have to get an environmental impact assessment to ensure that their project will have a minimal impact. That often includes a social impact as well, and a study of the impacts on the community. So by virtue of the structure of a transaction, they have to be concerned with that. But our clients were really concerned with just getting the deal done. And so they left it to the lawyers, they left it to their business people to make sure that piece was handled. But the assumption always was that the deal would move forward. In the international arena, there is a push now to put more of the onus on the lenders to ensure that there are more safeguards to the community, more safeguards to the environment that occur within the lifetime of a project. Now, whether or not a bank is positioned to do that is another question, but certainly banks can embed within their loan documentation requirements that the borrower which is the project developer, adheres to certain standards throughout the lifetime of the project. But as you'll learn, and as you may already be learning, that's soft law. So that's not a part of any sort of mandatory regulatory regime. It's the regulatory regime within the document, within the contractual relationship. And so that's also controversial in the international arena because there's no sort of outside entity making sure that that occurs. It's really the court of public opinion that ensures that those standards are adhered to. This is an issue, so when I say this, I mean environmental, social, cultural issues are of great concern in the renewable energy development space. And this will not go away, particularly as we move into an aspiration of zero carbon in our future. So the question of scale is always going to be important. This question of siting, where projects take place, the question of engagement will certainly be of importance. I fundamentally believe, and I'm fundamentally working on this as a scholar, that this transition affords us an opportunity to rethink the way development takes place, to reorder our relationships to capital, to development. However, that reordering will not happen without some pain. And I think we're experiencing that here in Hawaii in a sense because the Next Era transaction, proposed merger, really forces us to think about our relationships and to think about how we want to advance into this renewable energy future. Do we do it in the same way, where we have the vast majority of our renewable energy projects in the state in communities like the North Shore, being proposed in communities like Molokai and Maui, and those are where the resources are in large part. And do we have that development happening against the wishes of communities? Do we have development aggregated around low-income communities, as we see here in West Oahu? We know that development will need to take place. So the question is, how do we do so in a way that is equitable and just and allows for this participation?
I'm going to actually
stop
you there because I think that's a great question for our audience to wrestle with as we go to break. So how do we make that equitable transition? And we'll be back in a moment. Hopefully you'll have an answer and we'll chat more about that with Ms. Baker.
Aloha! Hello, my name is Patrick Bratton. I'm host at Global Connections here at ThinkTech Hawaii. We broadcast live every Thursday at 1 p.m. We bring Hawaii to the world and the world to Hawaii, talking about international events and various things of interest to the audience. Please join me. I look forward to talking with you and having you get to meet some of my guests. Aloha.
Aloha, my name is Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I'm the host of Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. We air live on the internet and also on Oceanic Channel 16. I'd invite you to come for a fresh new show every Tuesday from 12 to 1 o'clock. I try to bring on guests that give us a different viewpoint on aspects of sustainability in Hawaii, as well as trying to unpack some of the difficult concepts of measuring and achieving sustainability, particularly with regard to sustainable economic growth and prosperity in Hawaii. Please join us every Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. Mahalo, aloha.
Thank you for welcoming us to share our thoughts and insights with you, as well as our questions and the things that we grapple with. Right now, we're grappling with energy justice with Shalanda Baker, who's an associate professor at the UH Richardson School of Law, and the director of the Energy Justice Program. So for the majority of the show, we've been leading up to this point. We've been leading up to the point of sharing what energy justice is and your work in that area. So no more cliffhangers. Now is the time. If you could share with us a bit about the Energy Justice Program and how that came to be and what you're doing there.
Sure. So thank you for all of that. And thank you for having me on the show. This is really great. It's a good way to sort of enter into the next semester of our school year. So I joined the faculty at UH last August. And when I was hired, I was given the opportunity to start an energy project of some sort, given the need for greater engagement within the energy discourse by our law school. And it wasn't clear what that would look like. And so that was wonderful because I had a blank slate. And I went around and the community. I met with probably 50 to 100 people, 50 to 75 people. 100 sounds like a lot. So I met with tons of people in the energy space, from the regulatory side to the private side to nonprofits that were interested in energy and doing energy work, to individuals in the community who had done work on energy. And what became apparent to me was that there really was a gap in the discourse regarding energy. Like it or not, the economics of distributed energy generation tend to leave people behind.
Yes.
And we all love distributed energy because it's great, right? It allows for people to participate in the grid. It brings up our renewable energy portfolio. It's wonderful. It's been wonderful for the state. We've been a leader nationally in our distributed energy generation. But there was this kind of question and dark shadow lurking in the background around justice, and no one was really tackling it head on. I think the utility suggested that it wanted to stem the tide of distributed energy generation to protect poor people, and the renewable energy community, predominantly the solar folks with whom I spoke, were saying, well, we're doing a service. We need to quantify our service to the grid in a different way. It's not purely in economic terms. And so I think that was the beginning of this idea of energy justice, right? So where is the justice in that discourse and in that debate? And how do we ensure that the concerns that the utility was raising, and some people say those are disingenuous, I don't know, but they were real. How do we ensure that the concerns that the utility was raising were addressed, along with greater participation in renewable energy development? And for a long time, and I think in some jurisdictions, it seems like a zero-sum game, right? There's no answer, it's all or nothing. But I think what justice suggests is that there could be a middle ground where the utility becomes more flexible and moves into another business model to make way for broader participation by those communities that traditionally would not participate in renewable energy development, or individuals, because of their housing situation in a rental or in a condo, wouldn't normally be able to participate. And so energy justice is a broad umbrella that captures that issue, but so many more.
Right.
I have conceptualized energy justice based on the writing that's out there and just my own research on this issue to encapsulate three primary areas. The first is the environmental justice piece. And so, as I mentioned in the last segment, many of the communities that are impacted by energy development historically had been poor communities, rural communities, communities of color that had borne the brunt of development. And so environmental justice seeks to remediate that through legal mechanisms and seeks to bring that justice issue to the foreground when thinking about energy development. And energy justice would interact with that discourse. The second major component of energy justice is the climate justice piece, which I talked about in the first segment. And with Hurricane Sandy, many folks saw the disproportionate impact on poor folks and communities of color with Sandy and with Katrina as a climate justice issue.
I see.
So these are communities that are already vulnerably situated. How does energy development help to remediate that underlying vulnerability? And then the third piece is the energy democracy piece, which I think I've been talking about throughout the show. How can communities participate in that decision-making process to remediate climate vulnerability, to remediate environmental justice issues? And so with that with energy justice as the umbrella that kind of pulls all of those themes together, it can be a really powerful tool. And I think one that needs to make its way into the discourse, to the regulatory discourse, into the discourse around the utility debt spiral, and whether the utility would serve some purpose going forward and what that purpose would be.
Okay. And so
I can
talk.
talk.
This is riveting. So there's two things. One of the things is I'm familiar with the project that you did on the North Shore with the Energy Justice Program. But when I think of that, and I think of the conversation that we've had up to this point, and I think about community engagement, and I hear you talking about kind of the role changing and relationship massaging, if you will, and just changing how that looks, and the role that developers play and lenders play.
Right.
I think that's a unique space for the community to engage, because that's an opportunity for the community to hold people who are developing in their community a little bit more responsible, but specifically. So if you would like that developer to not only just give back to your community or put into a pot where there's some ongoing input for your community to kind of do with that money what they will, I know those are kind of normal in my understanding, but
Community benefits packages.
yes, community benefits
and benefits
packages.
agreements.
Right, but I think even asking for things to be implemented in the contract phase, and asking that more justice is played out in that agreement phase.
Right.
Like that, as I hear you talk, is a space that I would like to explore more, because I think that's an area where we can change that conversation, where we can redefine the relationships that we've had with developers and lenders, and just kind of change the space of that energy integration piece in those communities.
Right.
So if you could share with us, in a short period of time, I'm going to cut you short in a bit, but just what the project accomplished on the North Shore.
Sure. So the primary objective of the North Shore, well, there were two primary objectives of the North Shore engagement. One was to teach me and to teach our program how to engage with communities on complex energy issues. I think we learned a lot from our engagement. We did a lot of organizing. We spoke at 3 different sites. It was a great success, I think, by any measure. And we got a lot of great feedback from the community and a lot of gratitude for coming into the community. And the second was to inform about the merger, the proposed merger that's on the table. And a lot of people didn't really know about the context in which this merger would happen, or the proposed merger would happen, and the way the energy system works in our state. Right. So what's the PUC, what is a docket, that sort of thing. So we really think we accomplished our objective in terms of building capacity to develop a conversation around energy. And I'm actually later today meeting with a student to talk about some of the current efforts ongoing in the North Shore related to energy. So I think we help to start a conversation and to inform people and get people excited about what is happening in our state. And that's, if nothing else, to me, a huge accomplishment.
I agree, and I applaud your efforts and those of my co-students and colleagues. It's really exciting to be at Richardson at this time. It's certainly exciting to be able to interview you and to work with you in dual capacities professionally and in my collegiate studies. So it's just been a tremendous benefit, I feel, to the community to have you on the show here to share your work, but to share your passion, ambitions, and just to share your insight on what's happening around the world, but what can happen here in Hawaii. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do that this afternoon.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, Rachel. It's great to have you in the law school as well.
Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in. Hopefully you've learned a bit about energy and how you can engage. I'm hopeful that you take this information to heart, even to call up Hawaii Energy and ask, what is that on my energy bill? Which I think I need to do this weekend sometime to find out a little bit more.
Don't tell them I sent you. They know me over there.
I'm sure Ray Starling would be appreciative.
Yeah, he's great.
But truthfully, I do hope that you've taken some time to grapple with the questions that we've discussed here. And I hope that encourages you to engage in your communities, to hold developers and lenders, to hold your legislative leaders. Plug, legislative session is opening in the next few days, next Wednesday as a matter of fact. So speak with your legislators, ask questions, be involved, remain engaged, because energy matters to all of us. And so thank you for taking the time. R2H2, over and out.